Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another Your Gray Matters podcast. I'm Jason here with Neil. Thanks for joining us. How's it going today, Dad?
I am doing really, really well. I got all my ducks in order because I got a lawyer coming on today.
Oh, wow, that's wonderful. Yeah, so I haven't had a chance to check out this week's episode yet, but I know that it's going to go a little bit into the real estate law realm. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so as you know, if you're following Your Gray Matters, we've done a lot of good episodes on real estate investing, how real estate works. One thing that you need to have when you're doing real estate is a good lawyer. You must have representation. I asked Ira Greenspoon to come on today because he's a terrific real estate lawyer. He's my lawyer, and he really, really knows about these things. So stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen. This is not another boring lawyer episode because this stand-up guy is also a stand-up comedian when he's not being a lawyer.
Looking forward to checking that out. Thanks, everyone. Make sure you like, subscribe, follow, leave a comment. It's really helpful. And other than that, enjoy the episode.
Thank you, everybody. Hi, everybody. I'm Neil from Your Gray Matters. Welcome back. We are glad to have you again this week. And you know, our show is about miracles and solutions that exist, but you may not be aware of them. And we've done a lot of shows on real estate investing, how to look at your mortgage and maybe perhaps get a better mortgage, miracles in lending. But the one thing that's a real constant in real estate is that you should have a good lawyer. Every transaction requires a strong lawyer. I'm privileged today to have a great lawyer on with us. He's my lawyer. He's also a good friend. His name is Ira Greenspoon. He has a company called Counsel Law. I call him the stand-up lawyer, who's a stand-up guy, who's also a stand-up comedian. So we're really looking forward to interviewing him today. Remember, whether you have gray hair or no hair or red hair, but come on, we know what's under you, under your hair. You're going to be glad that you're on today. Ira, welcome to Your Gray Matters. We're glad to have you on.
Glad to be here, Neil. Thank you.
Thank
you for having me. Thank you for the nice introduction. And the only thing I agree with, I mean, I used to do stand-up, but I still have good hair. So
yeah. Well, you got black hair, so but we're still going to let you on because I've known you long enough. So
okay,
let me tell you a bit about Ira because he's a very, very interesting guy. He told me the other day, I love this. He was born in Toronto, but he's been living temporarily in our city for 39 years. So I love that, temporarily. That's just great. He's practiced law for over 25 years. He's been in private practice for most of it. And he really does do some great stuff. The other thing that I love about Ira is when he's not being not being a lawyer, he's a family man, he's a father, he's a grandfather, he's a great community leader, which you'll hear about later on in this podcast. And he does some really, really good stuff for our community. And he's also very involved in our synagogue that we have in our city. But he does a lot of good for the community in general. He's also a volunteer member of the Ontario Trillium Foundation grant team. And we're going to talk a little more about this because I'm hoping to get a grant when we're done this show. So not really. And Ira, welcome again. I wanted to ask you, Ira, why law for you? Why did you pursue law?
and that's a good question. Just to correct you, I've been doing this for 40 years.
40?
40
you
years.
told me that you're only 40 years old when we were off.
Well, I started very young. and why? I grew up not thinking I was going to be a baseball player or hockey player or a firefighter. I grew up thinking I was going to be a doctor. And I went to the University of Toronto. And one day somebody told me that they were writing the LSAT, the law school admissions test.
Yep.
And I said, well, I'll try that. And I tried it and I did very well.
Wow.
So the next few months, I also decided to write the MCAT, which is a business school admission test. I did equally well.
Hmm.
And then I just made a left turn and went to law school, and probably the right decision, that I'm not a doctor, but I'm surrounded by doctors, but they need lawyers.
Yes, yes. Well, I'll tell you on a personal level, I'm glad that you became a lawyer.
Thank you.
Because
Kind of wish I was a doctor, but thank you.
yeah, I just won't see you in case, God forbid, I get the flu or something.
There
So,
you go.
so Ira, so you've been a lawyer a long time. I'm sure that you've seen a lot of things go on. But I'm curious to know why, in your opinion, do people need lawyers, or when should they pursue a lawyer?
You know, it's a good question, and I would say that anytime you're entering into a transaction of any kind, you need a lawyer. But, even buying something at your store, you need a lawyer. Now, economically, it doesn't make sense when you buy something from Amazon to have a lawyer read over the contract. It doesn't, right? So you don't need maybe you need a lawyer to read over the every time you click on something on your computer, you're reading the terms and conditions, or you're ignoring the terms and conditions,
That's true.
which most of us do. Do you need? Yeah, of course you need a lawyer to read those terms and conditions. We don't know what we're clicking when we're clicking terms and conditions, but we do it to get onto the site that we want to get onto or get. So the answer is you always do. But of course, unfortunately, there's times in life where some people might have faced criminal charges, family law matters, death is an issue where lawyers can help. Sometimes before getting married, it's a good idea to talk to a lawyer, depending on the circumstances.
Yep.
And of course, any type of real estate transaction requires a lawyer. If you're buying a business, it needs a lawyer. If you're starting a business, you need a lawyer. So it always makes sense to have a lawyer. And the question is, and sometimes you can't avoid the economics. Sometimes you just need a lawyer.
Yeah.
But I guess the decision becomes, well, do I need a lawyer more than I need to save a few dollars and answer the question myself? And that's, that's how you decide if you need a lawyer.
Yeah, and I have to say that makes a lot of sense because as you know, I'm a mortgage broker, and I also help people invest their money in real estate. And one of my first questions to them is, do you have a good lawyer? Because you're going to need a lawyer. I'm sometimes taken aback by people not understanding that they need a lawyer, but you do. You're investing money, you're reading legalese, if I can call it that, and you need a trained eye. And you're a very good real estate lawyer. And I've often said to people, this is not a small investment, or this is not a small purchase, or you're locking yourself up for 30 years in a mortgage. I think somebody should read this. And in fact, if you don't have a lawyer, you can't do this. So the truth is, you have to have a lawyer. And and I guess the reason that I ask all this is I'm surprised by people who don't quite understand nowadays, let's say, what a real estate lawyer would do. Maybe we can drill down just a little more. I don't know if you have a scenario or if there's something that you could speak about, but what should a real estate lawyer be doing, let's say, in the purchase of a home?
Well, once upon a time, lawyers would often review the agreements before they were submitted. So the agreement of purchase, the offer. So you would prepare an offer, or an agent would prepare an offer. Many people, or sometimes even lawyers, have prepared offers. Often real estate lawyers would review them before they happen. That doesn't happen so often now. Real estate agents take more control of that. And often you don't see your lawyer until after the agreement is signed. We just went through that real estate frenzy or boom, and there wasn't any time to see lawyers during the process. You didn't even have time to put in a condition that would protect you. And if you went to a lawyer and asked them, hey, my real estate agent is suggesting that I don't put in a condition at all, let alone condition financing or inspection or the typical, A lawyer would say, no, you have to, you should have conditions. Are you sure you got the money? Are you sure that your financing in place? Are you sure you know what you're buying if you don't do an inspection? So you don't, you couldn't slow down the transaction long enough really to have a lawyer give opinions, even though maybe we should have. Maybe the client should hear what they are before they decide, okay, well, the house means more to me than definitely locking in my mortgage, or it means more than me. I'll fix whatever little problems there are. Just so you know that part of the, and so we went through a period of time where there was really people weren't accepting conditions. And I even saw deals where the offer had to come, it was demanded that the offer come in with a bank draft. Now, to do that, the purchaser or potential purchaser has to go to their bank. They have to pay and buy a bank draft. They have to bring it back. Then there's, upwards of 20 or 30 offers for the same house. And they have to go back to the bank if they don't win and cash it back out. There was no need to do that, but real estate agents use it as a way to differentiate between offers.
Wow.
Right. Oh, wait, this is binding because it's, they're more serious because they did this. When in fact, it should always come down to, when you're selling a house, the considerations are how much money you're getting. When is the closing? Is that consistent with your timing? And are there any conditions that slow this down for you as a seller? Like for instance, as I said, the typical conditions are financing, the purchaser needing to find a mortgage, inspection, get their own inspector to do for what the inspection is worth. It points out issues in the house if there are any, major issues in the house if there are any that they can see. You can't do an inspection of the roof in the middle of winter. Yeah. So if you're buying in winter, an inspection with respect to the roof is non-existent.
Yes.
That's
a good point. That's a very good point.
Yeah. So, but it's always good. But in the frenzy of life, when there's 20 people you're bidding against, you did what you had to do to buy the house or try to be the successful bidder. And but when it comes to, let's go to condominiums.
Yes.
With a condominium, there's a period of time after an offer is accepted where the buyer inspects, reviews what's called a status certificate. Correct. And the status certificate is issued by the management company of the condominium. And that will tell you if there's any money owing by the seller to the condominium corporation, if there's any lawsuits against the condominium corporation, what their budget is. Do they predict the common expense, the monthly condo fees to go up for any reason? So these are things that you have an opportunity to review and know before you finalize your deal. If you see a status certificate, and lawyers review those. I mean, you always should have a lawyer review those. And if there's something that concerns you, then you have the 10-day period to walk away from. So lawyers are more involved in condominium purchases than really. All we do is we get an email with an agreement of purchase and sale, and here you got another deal. And we're not involved until that point.
And that's fair. I'll tell you where I really ran into a time where more lawyers should have been involved was more in the real estate investment area. Because I've been involved in real estate as an investor and as someone who's promoted them. And quite often the first question out of my mouth to the person who's trying to raise money for their real estate project is, tell me who your lawyers are. Have they signed off? And also, my clients' lawyers will be reading the paperwork before I'll accept their investment. Do you have any problem with that? And it's a setup question on purpose. But in fact, I rarely have anybody who has any problem with that. But I believe that people invest in real estate should have someone reading these agreements because some of them are really spicy.
So people who are investing in real estate are generally, and when I mean the type of investment you're talking about, not just buying a house and renting it out, but you're talking about maybe mortgage, a piece of a mortgage, a piece of a project,
Exactly.
and
Pre-construction could be anything.
pre-construction. We believe that those investors are more sophisticated, and when they make their investment, you expect them to be more sophisticated, and perhaps that sophistication has to come with a lawyer reviewing the documentation and saying, yeah, this is good, or I'm concerned with it. And I have been, contacted about real investments in mortgage transactions, syndicated mortgages,
Right.
syndicated real estate deals, pre-construction deals. And there have been some where I've told clients, yeah, I'm a little concerned about this.
Yes.
What priority is your mortgage? What can they borrow around it? You have to make sure that your investment, the integrity of your investment remains.
Yeah.
So that's important.
Yeah.
And by the way, there's investors who are way more knowledgeable than lawyers in investing.
Absolutely. There's no question. It comes down to how many you've done and how sophisticated you are. But I mean, I've had clients who didn't know the difference between first position and second. So my only message is if you don't know, there's nothing wrong with asking. Sometimes you don't know that you don't know, and that's the message that I try to get out to people. So you're an interesting guy because not only are you a real estate lawyer, but you're also a licensed real estate salesperson.
That's very
Yet,
true.
as a lawyer, you can do most of these transactions as a salesperson, or maybe you can explain this whole thing because I'm curious to know why you're both.
Yeah, it's a good question. And you're not the first person to ask me that. In fact, the Real Estate Council of Ontario asked me the same question when I applied for my license, because lawyers are entitled to trade in real estate. And they can do so without really having to do the courses that real estate agents do, do the continuing education courses and pay the fees of real estate. And you can do all that. So I just thought at the time that, maybe it was an option for a career if I wanted a career change. But in any event, because I did do real estate for 20 odd years up to that point, I thought it'd be just a good tool to have just more knowledge.
Yeah.
And maybe a career change down the road. When I went to apply for my license, the Real Estate Council of Ontario actually called me in about a couple of things. And one of the things they wanted to know is, why would a lawyer want to get their real estate license? And I said, I didn't want to go through the answer of maybe it's just knowledge, right? I was more direct with them. And I said, look, a real estate, as a lawyer, I've done hundreds of agreements of purchase and sale. I prepared many. And maybe I charge $200 for preparing it, or maybe I get a deal out of it. But as a real estate agent, I can charge 2.5%. And they looked at me like, what, this is all about money? Which the truth is, it pretty much is all about money. But it fit what I was doing. Right now, thankfully I'm a busy lawyer. Yes. And I don't have a lot of time. So I'm, to do real estate, realtor work. Yes. But I enjoy doing it, and I try to do it, a few times a year. But primarily I'm a lawyer now. And one day my retirement might look like, turning it the other way and doing more real estate. But one thing you have to do is make sure that whatever you do, whether you're acting primarily as a real estate agent or primarily as a lawyer, that you don't put yourself in a position that's a conflict of interest.
Exactly. But I like the fact that I've actually always enjoyed the fact that you have the knowledge of sort of both sides of the coin. I think it's a very clever idea.
And by the way, just as an aside, so one of the byproducts of doing both in studying is that I've actually gained some more respect for real estate agents.
Sure.
For many of them, not for all of them, but for many of them. And, because as a lawyer, you don't know how many times over the years, not so much lately, but over the years when I have clients tell me that their real estate agent has somebody who will save them $200.
Yeah.
And that's the same person that's charging 2.5% on a real estate deal, or double ending it for 4 or 5%, which is a lot more than $200.
Yeah.
And yet they're going to save you $200, but they would never think of, many won't think of reducing. And I'll tell you a funny
Exactly.
story about that. I was selling a property in Toronto, and so in the listing, I said that cooperating broker, which is the buyer's agent,
Okay.
would get 2%. Now in Toronto, the norm is a split of 5%, so 2.5 each.
Correct.
But I was trying to save the seller some money, and I said 2% cooperating brokers. And I had a real estate agent call me up and tell me that no agent will show your property at less than 2.5%. Now, their obligation is to the buyer, their
Yeah.
client.
Yeah.
And if that's a house that fits the needs of the client, then you show it to them.
Right.
But you can see how some of them are driven, and maybe we're going to get some dirty email because of this, but that's a true story, and
Yeah.
it shows you that unfortunately, people don't always look out for the best interests of their client if it conflicts with their best interests of them financially.
Yeah.
And so we may get some nasty comments from realtors because of that, but we should all be doing what's in the best interest.
We welcome all comments at Your Gray Matter. So.
Well, let me just say that our focus should be on the best interest of the client.
Absolutely.
And if I'm just calling it out, I'm calling it out. Yeah.
Do you know what? I have no problem with that, because truth is, I am a real estate investor, and we've done some things, and I'm also a teacher from stage on real estate, and I expect that the information I'm giving is full disclosure. It's always about full disclosure and what's best for the client, and I think that that's what you're saying too. Is you have to think about your client, not your wallet first. It's not the way to do business, and it's a very good point. When you're doing lawyering, in addition to real estate, I know that you do estate planning, and you help people with probate and things like that. I don't even know how to ask the question. That's part of why I have you on today. Can you explain a bit about probate? What is it? How does it work?
Sure. So when someone dies, hopefully they have assets, and sometimes sometimes, and we'll talk about this, we'll go back and talk about planning and estate planning, but let's talk about probate first.
Okay. Or you can leave this off as you wish.
Well, here's how we're going to do it.
Okay.
When someone has an asset, and when they've died with assets, and money in the bank is a very good example. Real estate is a very good example. When they die with money in the bank wants to know who has a right to that money. Okay. Now, if there's no joint account, if it's just in one person's name, the bank's not going to release those funds until they're certain where they're supposed to go. Mm-hmm. Now, often you can present the bank with a copy of the will of the person, and a copy of the will state in there who's entitled to the monies. But depending on the amount of money in the account, the banks don't necessarily want to make the decision that the will is valid.
Okay.
So there's a process that used to be called probate. It's not called probate anymore, but it's the easiest term. It's an application for administration. And there's two types, one with a will and one without a will, the administration of an estate. So you apply to the court, and usually through a lawyer. You apply to the court, and the court will review the documentation, decide who has the authority as trustee. Now, we used to call that executor. Now it's trustee.
Really? See, I'm learning. Okay.
Okay. So, and they will say, okay, Neil is named in the will as the executor. There's no challenges to that. We see no reason why Neil should not be the trustee. And they stamp the administration. Now you have a certificate of administration, which we normally and usually call probate. But you have a certificate. Now the bank can rely on that certificate to know that Neil has a right to deal with the funds that were in the bank account. Now, Neil may not be entitled to the funds in the bank account. He may just be the trustee. He may not be the beneficiary. The beneficiary is the person who has been named as the person who's entitled to those funds. So Neil's job in that case would be just to make sure that all the funds are collected and paid out to the person or people that are entitled to it. But that whole process we used to call probate. And it's really just the application to the court for permission to deal with the property and the appointment of the correct people to do that. Now, there's a fee to that.
Yes.
Sure, there's legal fees, but the bigger fee is is a court fee, or what we used to call the probate fee. And the cost to probate a will is $15 for every $1,000 of asset.
Wow.
So if you have 100,000, what you say, wow, but that can really grow now in real estate, can easily be worth $1 million or two, and that, so $1 million is $15,000 of probate. A $2 million house is 30. $100,000 in the bank is a $1,500 application to the court.
Okay.
Let alone any legal fees. But so it can add up. So estate planning really means not just deciding on who it goes to, but trying to maybe minimize those fees or taxes.
Okay.
And that's where estate planners come in. And for instance, if instead of having a bank account alone, it was a joint bank account, whether it be with spouses or children or whatever, then the monies automatically go to the survivor. Same thing with real estate. When usually married couples own property, or spouses own property, there's joint tenants. It's like a joint bank account. It means that the survivor is entitled to that property without having to do a probate. But if the last surviving spouse or the last surviving joint tenant will have to deal with those issues, and there may be capital gains taxes for the estate to pay when properties get passed down to children, and there's maybe probate fees that have to be because you have to do an administration to get the certificate so that you can file the certificate, which allows the registry office to allow you to deal with the lands. Right? You cannot deal with the lands unless you have these certificates. I mean, legally deal with the lands unless you have a certificate.
So there's quite a bit to this.
So the estate planning is a way to, again, minimize taxes in a legal way, because some assets have growth potential, some don't. Some are income producing, some are an investment in real estate will grow. So somehow there's going to be capital gains on death, usually. So you plan for that's estate planning.
I see. And when we were off camera, you were mentioning to me that we should make a comment about your feelings about insurance and how to place the beneficiaries on that. Can you talk a bit about placement of beneficiaries all throughout estate planning?
Yeah. So estate planning. So one way to avoid having to do probates or taxes, etc. Many investments, RSPs, RIFs, mutual funds, they allow you to name a beneficiary.
Correct.
And so a beneficiary, it's like, and of course, on life insurance policies. So let me give you an example. with a life insurance policy, if you don't name a beneficiary,
Mhm.
it becomes part of your estate.
Right.
And to be able to get that money from the insurance company, you'd have to do an administration. You'd have to pay $15 per every thousand of that investment to the court to get the authority for the insurance company to release those funds to you.
Right.
They want to know who the proper party is, right? Whereas if you name a beneficiary, you avoid all of that. The monies are released to
Exactly.
the beneficiary.
It's one of the
And that,
benefits of insurance, actually.
right. And mutual funds can do
Mhm.
the same. And pension plans may have the same. You have to ask. And wherever you're entitled to name a beneficiary, you should. Now, here's one more thing that may or may not apply to some of your audience members. But sometimes when people separate, they forget to change their beneficiaries.
Ah, good point.
So the beneficiary may be their ex-spouse, and not their new family or their
Right.
kids
Right.
or whatever. So be aware of who your name. Be aware that if you can name a beneficiary, you name a beneficiary, and be aware of the fact that if circumstances change, and maybe your beneficiaries require reconsidering as well.
And of course, beneficiaries and insurance can be locked in. And then if you have a divorce or something, sometimes it can be hard to change beneficiaries too. So you have to know what you're doing.
Well, I think that you should have a right to change your beneficiaries, and I'm sure if you talk to your insurance companies, they'll show you how. But just be aware that if circumstances change, you got to take a holistic approach to life and
No,
your assets.
it's a very, very good point. I've done investments for clients with registered funds, and you're right. We always appoint the beneficiary with the trustee, and it's a very, very good point. Thank you, Ira, for that. Ira, you also do corporate law, I believe, and
I do.
I'm curious about when do you use a corporate lawyer, and what do you do as a corporate lawyer?
Yeah, so corporate lawyers will help run businesses and corporations, and they can help, and we should help with the acquisition of those businesses. Whether there's the two main ways to acquire a business, and one is you buy the assets of the business, you buy all the equipment, the inventory, the accounts receivables, you buy the assets. Or you can buy the shares of the company and take over the company. When you buy the assets, generally speaking, you're buying the assets and you're not buying any issues. I mean, you got to make sure there were no issues. The assets are owned free and clear, but you don't buy the assets. When you buy the company, you're inheriting the company.
Right.
You're inheriting the assets. You're inheriting the bills, the liabilities, and any lawsuits, any failing to remit taxes. I mean, these are all things that you have to look at, especially hard when you're buying shares of a company. There's reasons for buying both, and often it's the accountant that will advise you which way to go. But there's different things to be concerned with, whether it's a share purchase or an asset purchase, but the end result is the same. You're going to buy a business. So you need a lawyer to acquire a company. I mean, then you may want shareholders agreements. You may have contracts with suppliers. These are all things that lawyers, you could be a landlord. You need a lease. Now, residential tenancies now, I mean, the government has a lease form that's used. So you don't need a lawyer to do that anymore, but commercial leases you do. Another big problem where legal help can come in is if you are a landlord or a tenant and something in the relationship's broken, whether the tenant's not paying rent or the landlord's not supplying heat, it helps to have legal assistance, and it doesn't have to be a lawyer. There's a lot of paralegals that do a lot of good landlord and tenant work to assist you, depending on what your issue is. right now we have a broken system in Ontario. I don't do landlord and tenant work really, but it's very, we're at a stage now where the wait to get in front of the tribunal is many months.
Yes.
So landlords trying to remove tenants because of cause have to put up with them for many months. And landlords who are doing wrong to the tenants still have many months to wait before they can, voice their concerns and their complaints. So, but anyways, legal assistance on the simplest level there would be available. But from a corporate law point of view, I mean, we do, we start in corporations, we have to maintain corporations. There's annual resolutions, minutes to be done. There's corporate filings that have to be done yearly. So sometimes accountants can do it, sometimes lawyers do it. But that's what, business lawyers, corporate lawyers do.
Okay, and that's good to know. Ladies and gentlemen, this may sound like I'm going to use the word dry, but I have found over the years when I'm talking with people that I wish that I had a lawyer with me, because it's amazing the questions that come up all the time, and it's really good to talk to a lawyer if you're considering basically to do anything nowadays. I just heard even I'm going to buy a widget on Amazon. I got to call Ira now. But of course,
problem is that most lawyers don't read the terms and conditions either. So
yeah. I'm only interested in the return policy.
Exactly.
And so you told me in your younger days you did a bit of criminal law and civil litigation. You did that for a while, but I was curious, do you ever find humor in the law? Like, are there funny things that go on?
Yeah, there's funny things in every area, but when you're starting out, there's a possibility, especially if you open your own office, there's a possibility that you do whatever law comes in the door.
Okay.
And so it wasn't uncommon to do some criminal law. And there's, two cases that I still laugh about. I laugh about. Early on in my legal career, when I opened my office, I worked in association with a very senior lawyer. And one of his client's sons got into trouble with the law. Right. What happened was, all his life he grew up knowing that he would go into the family business. And very soon after he went into the family business, the business went bankrupt.
Right.
So he went through, unfortunately, a depression for many weeks, many months. And then after about, let's say, 6 months of doing nothing, he decided he's got to do something. And he decided he also should apply for unemployment insurance. Mm-hmm. So he did that. Well, before he even got his first check, he got a job. But he justified in his mind. So he justified in his mind that maybe they owed him for the 20 weeks or 24 weeks or the 6 months that he was depressed and not working. And it was easy. Every 2 weeks you had to fill out a card that said that you're not working and that you're willing and able to work.
Right.
And you signed it. Every 2 weeks he did that. Well, after about 23 weeks of that, he was found out.
Oh boy. And
they charged him with fraud, whatever, fraud under 5,000 or 3, whatever the number was back then. And as soon as he was charged, he paid it back. So, you're trying to figure out where the humor is. But anyways, he charged him and he had to go to court. So I was given the case. Now, I figured he had paid this back. He was a good person. He made a mistake. He went through a tough time and he made a mistake, but he's okay. I just figured that it would not be a horrible thing. So I started calling Crown attorneys to see, who were handling the case, to see what kind of penalty they were looking at. And some of them were telling me they're going to look for jail time.
Wow.
And yes, exactly, jail time. So I kept shopping for crown attorneys. Some people shop for judges. I didn't know enough about that.
Wow.
But I talked to, finally, after talking to a crown attorney that was handling this case, he said that, okay, I've convinced him he won't ask for jail time, but he's not going to agree to just a fine. He's just not going to ask for jail time. So so my client phones me up and says, is there a risk of me going to jail? And this is where I made my mistake. I said, no, but bring a toothbrush. Now, I thought I was being funny. Okay. So we go in front of the judge with our guilty plea. Well, the judge's name was Judge Mean, M-E-A-N.
Oh.
So that should be an indication, right?
Oh.
So I proceed to spend 10 minutes explaining why he's a good guy and that go light on him. And he's working and he's a valuable member of society. He made a mistake. Well, now it's the Crown's turn. And he right away goes and asks for 9 months in jail.
Oh.
Well, I just asked for a timeout, which really you're not supposed to ask for a timeout in the middle, but I did because I didn't know any better. And the judge said, well, after being a little mean, he granted me this timeout. And I went to the Crown. I said, what are you doing? You promised me that you wouldn't ask for jail time. And now you're asking for jail time. He said, well, I looked at your client and he's wearing a Harry Rosen blazer and his shoes are good quality shoe shine. And you know what? It was awful what he did. And there's nothing worse than someone who steals from the public purse. And I go, like, murder's not worse or, but anyways, so now I had to go back to the judge because he finished his thing and now it was my turn to rebut. And basically, without getting on my hands and knees and begging, I got on my hands and knees and begged.
Wow.
And at the end of it, Judge Mean said, well, I was ready to go along with the 9 months in jail for this. But because of your counsel, meaning me, he convinced me that you would never reoffend. But as a matter of deterrence, I'm sentencing you to 90 days to be served on weekends. And I was probably more devastated than the client. Now, for the opportunity to allow me to do this for the client, and we're going back almost 40 years, I charged him $800. Now, this was a Friday afternoon. They put the cuffs on him, even wearing his Harry Rosen blazer, and they took him off to jail. He called me Monday. So he went in on Friday and he was out Monday morning at 6 a.m. And that counted for 4 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. But he came up to me and he said, it's a long weekend coming up. And I haven't told my parents about this. And I have to spend the weekend with them. It was a holiday. And Friday was Good Friday. And Monday was Easter Monday. So now it's Monday. And I now, like, I'm panicked. Like I was really upset by the results. So I gave him the name of a senior criminal lawyer who he went to see on Wednesday. And he came back to see me and he told me that guy wants $3,000 or $5,000 to do an appeal. And I can't afford that. You do it for me. So to do an appeal, you had to serve papers on them, on the Crown. And then you had to give them 3 days notice. So now I had to serve, now it was Wednesday. I served them on Thursday. They agreed to take short service on Wednesday. I served them Wednesday afternoon, and we were in court on Thursday, and they accepted that. And somehow, I don't know how I did it, but we won. We were granted bail pending appeal, which meant he was out for the long weekend. For that privilege, I charged him $800. Then 6 months later, we're in court for an appeal. And it was the first time as a lawyer I had to put on the robes, the vest, the robes, and And then we walk into the courtroom, and the Crown is there. And I go up to the Crown and I said, he was sentenced to weekends in jail as a deterrence. He's done a weekend. Whether he does one weekend or 8 weekends or 5 weekends, it's the same deterrence. He's been to jail. Why don't we agree that it's done? And the Crown said to me, I'm going to ask for 9 months in jail. So my client panics. Forget the appeal. And I look at him and I said, it took me 45 minutes to put the gowns on. We're going ahead with it. Well, we were in front of Judge Lisson. I still remember 40 years later, he was fantastic. It was his first case on the appeal bench. And it was a really interesting, instead of my turn, your turn, my turn, he just asked questions back and forth at all of us. He told us to come back the next day. And when we got there the next day, he set aside the jail time and substituted a fine and a fine, maybe community service or something. And for that privilege, I charged my client $800. Now, the moral of that story is, if I won the first time, I would have made $800. But because I lost, I won, I got $2,400 from the same guy. Now, today, that would probably cost you about $50,000 from criminal lawyers.
Yeah. So,
and the other funny thing, haha moment in civil law, civil law is any lawsuit, like a lawsuit, anything that's not criminal that ends up in court, basically.
Okay.
And so I was doing this case again. Now this is a few years later, and I have my robes on, except that, over the years, I wasn't quite the same size I was when I was measured for the robe. So
okay.
It was tough to fit into the vest. So I was having a particularly proud moment. I had actually was doing very well. In fact, the court clerk came up to me and said at a recess that he's been in court many times with my brothers, and he was referring to both Eddie Greenspan and Brian Greenspan, who are great lawyers and certainly not brothers of mine. And I took the compliment as, he said, I've been in court many, many times with your brothers. You're just as good. Now, it was impossible, but I thanked him. But so now I'm feeling very proud. And I'm doing my summation to the court, telling the court why they should rule in favor of my client, which they ultimately did. And I puffed out my chest, and one of the buttons for my vest flew off and hit the judge's bench. And if that wasn't embarrassing enough, the court clerk started crawling around looking for it and returned it to me in the middle of my summation. So that was as proud as I was. I was humbled very quickly by a button.
That is very, very funny. Oh, those are great stories. I got to ask you, since we're talking about humor, you won something called the Funniest Lawyer with a Day Job contest. What's that about?
I did. Yeah. There was a contest, and I think it was, early 90s, maybe 1993, 94. And as part of a fundraiser that was being held at the Harbor Castle Hilton in Toronto, it was part of a fundraising evening for juvenile diabetes. So part of it was a comedy contest, and it was the funniest lawyer or accountant. And so I entered. And so somebody pointed to me, and I was fearless, and I entered it. Now, so the first thing they asked me to do was to appear on city television and do a 45-second or a minute promo of some of my material, and they had an accountant with me, and we did some jokes, and they went over. I thought it went over well with the host. I mean, there's no real audience, so you don't hear feedback, but the hosts enjoyed it. And then I went home to get ready for the evening, and while I was getting ready, I was in the shower. I had this thought, because I used to do magic as well.
Right.
And I decided that what happens if I did magic and comedy? And magic was my props for my comedy. And I ended up coming up, while I was in the shower, figuring out how I would do 3 tricks at the same time with audience participation as props for my comedy. And it was pretty much all off I just riffed. It was all off the cuff, basically. And I did 25 minutes of this comedy with the magic. And at the end of the day, I was the funniest lawyer accountant, and it was such a great high, and my audience loved it. I mean, there were 400 people there. I mean, and 25 minutes of comedy. If you go to a comedy show, the host will come out, and then somebody will come out and do 5 minutes, and then the next person might do 15 minutes, and then the 10 or 15 minutes, and then the headliner will do an hour in a regular good show. 25 minutes is a tough number of minutes to fill.
Yep.
And it went fast, and it went great, and everybody had a great time. And I ended up with a few groupies after the show. So it was just a wonderful evening, actually.
Yeah, well,
and all for a good cause. And that's most of my speaking. And I did a lot of public speaking. I did a lot of comedy, and it was always for a fundraising event, or or a good cause.
And I have to say that that's a big part of who you are. Not one of the Greenspan brothers, but your other things. And I've gone to some of our charitable events where you've been on the mic, and I've seen you have people in hysterics for a long, long time. Like, you have a great talent for that. And I also know that you're a great volunteer. Ira, we actually did an episode of this podcast, number 16, on the benefits of volunteering for you, not so much the organization that you volunteer for. And you do a ton of volunteering. And yet the one area that I find interesting about volunteering that maybe most people are not aware of, but you're aware of, is you have to sometimes make really tough decisions when you're a volunteer. I mean, I'm talking about, I've seen buildings being sold in other charities that I've worked with, and where you have to make hard decisions as leadership of where to put the money that you have. And I think that that's something that people don't realize. And I'm saying all this to commend you and other leaders that I've worked with, where charity and raising money is great, and doing what you did, the comedy and the great stuff too. But these great organizations work because they have great leadership who take things on. And this is just my way of paying tribute to you, because I know that you have done some great stuff, to be honest, in our synagogue. And just want to mention that.
Yeah, thank you. I've been on the leadership of 2 or 3 different organizations. Listen, there's so many, and so thank you. And Neil, you clearly have done the same, and maybe more. And there's so many great causes, and there's so many volunteers, and that whose causes are in many ways as important, maybe more important than what that I've been involved in. And so I thank you for what you're saying, but I humbly have to admit that there are many hundreds and thousands of people who have done better causes and more work. And just if you find your cause and find something that you believe in, and just do your best for it, then you've done, and then you've done great.
And I agree with you, and I thank you for saying that, because I believe people should volunteer. If they have anything in their heart to volunteer, go out and do it. You're going to learn a lot, you're going to do a lot, and you're going to play a major role, most likely in saving someone's life or improving someone's life. And that's a great gig.
So, you had mentioned the Ontario Trillium Foundation, and I just want to mention that briefly. So I am a member of the grant review team of the Ontario Trillium Foundation for the Hamilton catchment. And what's required of members of the review team are reviewing 3 to 4 times a year grants, of various kinds. And because we went through COVID, a lot of the grants were about resiliency and helping organizations convert to, let's say, remote type of projects, or improving them so they're able to better facilities, and and we do it behind the Zoom lens, and we do it, and we review our cases, and we may have to review 15 or 20 different applications of, there may be 30 for the area, and I'd be apportioned 14 or 15 of them. But about 6 months ago or so, I had the opportunity to attend at one of the recipients of a grant. They were being visited by the Honorable Neil Lumsden, the Minister of
Sure, I know Neil. Yeah.
Minister of Tourism, amongst other things. And the organization, and I'm going to name it, was called Food for Kids, which I knew nothing about other than I may have reviewed their application. And when I went to this facility in the East End of Hamilton, and what this organization does is they get food. People also donate food or monies. And anyways, they get food and they distribute it very quietly, discreetly, to students that are challenged and don't have the food, they're not eating properly.
Right.
Their families don't have the funds or whatever. And Food for Kids, so make sure that they have food for the weekends and so they will. So on this blackboard that they had, on this chalkboard, they had the names of almost every school in Hamilton, almost every school, and they had beside each school the number of students that needed food and needed to be a recipient of this program. Now, I'm going to tell you that these schools included, schools in less fortunate areas, higher income areas. I mean, there were people in all areas of Hamilton, students who went to school hungry, and this program would go in and put food in their lockers so they could take that home and have food for the weekend. Now, how beautiful is that cause? And there's the applications for the Ontario Trillium Foundation is filled with organizations that do work like this, that also have many volunteers who are packing the food, delivering the food, finding the sources for the food, helping kids on, horseback riding for disabled children, and on and on and on, and helping people once they get out of jail, try to conform back to life, normal, society. All of those are worthy causes. Almost every listen, there's the odd application that doesn't hit me in the heart like most do, but most of them do. And there's, getting back to your volunteer, there's many ways people can volunteer, and some of them is just packing up the food for them to be delivered to schools. And that is the benefit I get out of being part of the Ontario Trillium
But
Foundation.
I have to commend you, because there are a lot of great organizations, people. That's got to be a hard decision, sometimes gut wrenching, I would imagine.
No, I don't think that I don't think at my level. So I don't think that, and maybe this is the way you have to look at it, I don't think that my vote is the casting vote.
Okay.
I think I'm one of 15 people.
Okay.
I think that firstly, the applications are vetted by managers. So anything that gets to you probably it qualifies. Whether some you see as being more important than others, that's for sure. But my vote isn't the casting vote. And I don't always agree with the organizations that get the fund over another one.
Sure.
For the most part, they're all in need and they're all doing good work. And there's, worthy probably of any grant they're given.
Well, I'm glad that you do it. And I still will salute you as a leader, because leadership is required for organizations, and good that you give your time to do it. I wanted to ask you, just as we're wrapping up, how best for people to contact you if they're looking for a good lawyer in the areas that you've talked about today?
Well, you certainly can Google the name of my firm, which is Counsel Law.
Okay. And
Is
is there a website?
Yeah, it's www.counsel, COUNSELLAW.ca.
Perfect. And we'll post that on this podcast. And please, ladies and gentlemen, if you're looking for something in the areas that Ira talked about, especially about how to do comedy, please reach out to him. I can tell you from personal experience, he does a great job. Ira, thanks for coming on today because, as I said in the beginning of the show, we've talked a lot about real estate on Your Gray Matters. We'll do more, but I've learned that it's important to have good counsel. If for no other reason, then I may not know if I even need a lawyer or not, but it's good to be able to ask a lawyer and say, do I need you or not? And it, ladies and gentlemen, in my particular instance, it saved some serious money for myself and for my clients. And
Well,
thank you, Ira.
Neil, thank you. It was fun and informative for me too. And good luck and thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We will see you next week on Your Gray Matters. Thanks for tuning in. And as I said, we'll see you next week.